my fellow comic book collectors, it's Alan, the Comic Collector Geek, and this is the Wednesday video where I answer your questions. Uh, we only got a few questions this week, I should say, but they're pretty interesting ones that kind of ask a little bit more details on some of the questions that I answered last week. So I'll get into them, some pretty good questions. So Bat Grant asked, what is the status of the Kickstarter comic that you put together? Have any been sent out? Well, actually, I think pretty much all of them have been sent out at this point. There was a delay, actually multiple delays, where we actually got them printed. They were totally messed up, got them reprinted. They were totally messed up. And now this third time is a charm, I guess. There was no issues. So those have been sent out. They were sent out last week. So people should be getting them in the next week or two. And if you're in Canada, maybe 3. It's really slow to get things in Canada. But they have been sent out. So people should start getting their comics. And on Monday, Stephen actually got his comics, and that's one less person that will be complaining to me. Hopefully you'll get them soon, and hopefully you'll enjoy them. Thanks for your patience, and thanks for everyone that was patient and supported the Kickstarter. It's been a really long haul. Okay, K. Munin wrote, do you feel the comic industry still has time to course correct and fix the glaring problem? Do you think comics can one day find their way back into regular retail stores? Okay, if I'm a big believer in capitalism and in supply and demand. What creates demand is the quality of the product. Good quality product, lots of demand. If you look at manga, and I keep on pointing back to manga and the popularity of manga, it's because people enjoy the product. Right now, people are not enjoying the comic product for the most part. I mean, there's some cool covers here and there, but for the most part, people are not enjoying the product. Now, I do see them making shifts in the comic industry. I heard that Marvel got rid of its DEI elements, and there is a change in the culture right now to get rid of that kind of activist element within the comic publishers, and that bodes well. I think if they go back to the basics of writing good stories and writing things that engage people again, you can see a shift. If they just create a good product, it can shift. And the thing is, we don't have to rely on just Marvel and DC. It's not really about them. If you look back at the golden age, there was 2,000 publishers back then, and everybody read comics. And that's because they were producing good stuff and people generally wanted to read it. If you look at manga, it's the same thing. There's lots of different publishers within manga, and as a result, you get that demand because they're producing good quality content. So I do see the potential there, as long as companies are either start up and take advantage of this kind of actually huge opportunity. Like, comics in a way are a better format than manga. They're thinner, they're easier to manipulate. They're more designed for North American sensibilities in terms of the way that they read. They have the potential. It's just that right now, the companies that are producing comics have ignored what the fans actually want. And if you can just get some companies that are ambitious, there's a huge market and a huge potential that just needs to be realized. Now, if that happens, if they're either the big two or maybe some of these other smaller companies do kind of rise up to that challenge, I think what will end up happening is you'll see a demand kind of flow in. And what'll happen is if there's enough demand, you'll see either more retailers wanting to uh, like you know, sell those books, because there's always companies that want to meet the demand. So it's really, it's all back to basic capitalist economics, right? If you produce something that's really good that people really want, there'll be companies that will rise up to that to meet that demand. So this is an opportunity. If you're, and this is why Kickstarter is doing so well, because that has been one of the places where people have been trying to produce cooler things. Like just in the previous question, I tried to produce something cool. This is like a thing. Like, if you can produce good stuff and create that demand and create that interest, then you'll do well. So I don't know. I just wish Marvel and DC would get on with it. Archivist Adrift wrote, I don't know if if I've asked you this before, but what are some YouTube channels that you're aware of that almost exclusively discuss Golden Age comics besides your own? Well, the two that I can think of right off the top of my head would be Keston's Old School Comics. Jerry the Jitterbug it would be Restoration, but also he does a lot of stuff where he looks at Golden Age books. He's mainly a Golden Age collector. Another one would be Automatic Comics. He basically is mainly a Golden Age collector, but he does sometimes look at the Silver Age and so forth, but mainly Golden Age. Those would be the three biggest channels I can think of. Another one that kind of fits in there a little bit sometimes is Alex the Comic Hoarder. Really good channel as well. In terms of other ones, I can't really think of any. There's not that many. Golden Age is kind of ignored for the most part. Those are the main channels I watch, for example. Now, I know on Instagram, there's a lot of people that not do videos, but, do posts about Golden Age. There's a huge community of people that like Golden Age on Instagram. But YouTube, it's still a very small market of people willing to do it. But the reason being, if you look at my channel, like I'm not the biggest of the Golden Age ones, but I kind of represent what the standard is, like in terms of how big the channels get. They just don't get that big when they only focus on Golden Age. There's not enough interest there. And that's why a lot of the ones that do comic book stuff generally go beyond the Golden Age and try to get more of a mass appeal. I like Golden Age, so I'm going to be more focused on that. But I do show other stuff, but for the most part, that's where my interests lie. So this is my hobby. It's not like if it does well, then great, but it's really just a hobby thing for me. Next question comes from Jerry Penix. I got my book that has complimentary copy on it. What does that mean? And it is a newsstand copy, and it's Amazing Spider-Man 238. Okay, so complimentary copies were ones that were directly from the publisher. So they didn't go to a newsstand for the most part. They were within the offices or given to people connected to the offices. So they were not designed to be sold. They were designed to just be given away to either staff or people connected to the publisher directly. So they're kind of cool. They're not quite a file copy, but they're cool in their own way. They're not that common compared to other things, but for the most part, they don't really get bigger money. I have a few complimentary comics in my collection, but for the most part, they don't they don't get an extra value for the fact that they have that big stamp on them. Sometimes people actually don't like the big stamp. It's just like, you know, the conversation about date stamps. Some people love them, some people hate them. You know, it's the same thing. The complimentary stamp is quite big, and generally people don't like that because it is big, and sometimes that actually can reduce the value. But for the most part, they are rarer because, well, there wasn't that many, and most of the comics are designed to be sold. But that rarity doesn't translate into extra value. So yeah, I hope that helps. But it is cool. You know, it's a bit of provenance behind the comic that you have. So enjoy it. Robbie Josephs wrote, "What made you start collecting comic books?" Well, I've told this story many, many times. I figure if you do your genetics testing, you know, there will be a gene that I have and that any other collectors have that is very turned on my in my genetics, where I have that collector gene. I love collecting things. I actually really like things that have a history to them. So I was primarily a coin collector when I was very young and became like an expert. I was like an expert on Canadian coins by age 7. I probably was not, I wouldn't say I was like the top expert, but I was really, really knowledgeable. Like you could ask me pretty much anything about Canadian coins at that time, and I was pretty accurate and pretty much knew everything. But a lot of my knowledge is still in my maybe up to my 12-year-old age in terms of the pricing. So it's like totally useless pricing now. But that collector part of me, I liked coins because it, you know, you'd have the different kings, you'd have that different history kind of related to it. Well, I was given comics as a kid. I really liked Scrooge and Howard the Duck and Richie Rich and all those kind of comics. And I also enjoyed comics that were relevant to TV shows that I watched. So I liked having things that kind of capture pop culture. And comics were probably one of the best ones for doing so. So I really enjoyed comics when I didn't see them as something to collect, but I did see them as something that was collectible. I don't know if that makes sense. But what happened was my mind really changed in terms of the way I viewed comics when I went to my coin store and they had comic on the wall, Howard the Duck #1, and I saw, wow, these are not just things you read and, you know, that are kind of collectible, but no value. I didn't see them as having value. But when I saw it on the wall, it really put the light switch on in my head, saying, man, these are cool to collect as well. So I then became, it was like an instant conversion where I became a collector of comics. I was probably like, I don't know, like I was pretty young. I was like, I think that's like 1981, or like I was like 8 to 10 years old, somewhere around 81 or 83. It was like really early on when I did that. So yeah, so I've been collecting ever since. Okay. Big Money Grip wrote, boomers are dying out and probably mostly affect the golden age collectors. That's not true. This is one of those myths that people have that, oh, boomers will die, they'll dump all their golden age collections onto the market and the prices will tank. In the last video, I kind of was trying to explain that that's not really what was going to happen. Boomers don't necessarily just have golden age collections. They would have silver age, they would have bronze age. I know a lot of boomers still collect to the modern age. If you look at the DC Universe collection, it went right up till the modern era. So if they're going to dump anything, it would be right across the board. Now, there are some boomers that like the older books and the bigger books. But what you really have is a passing of a torch if the boomers die. And I'm not trying to kill off the boomers, so don't worry, boomers. I'm trying to keep you alive as long as possible. But what you're seeing is a passing of a torch. And generally what happens is, this is kind of the way, the life of a comic collector. Like what happens is, if you look at my life, the way I collected, in the 90s, I was in university. I had very little money, but I would collect what was available. What was available in that price range where you have no money, you're poor. Then I, collected up till I met my wife. We settled down. We had kids, and there was like, I'd get a few books here and a few books there, but nothing too spectacular. And I would never buy a big book because I really didn't have the financial capabilities to buy big books. And then get into my 40s, I have a little bit more money. Get into my 50s, my kids are getting older. They're kind of moving out. There's not those crazy expenses anymore. I've pretty much saved for their universities. They're all done. They're all ready to just go off and do their own thing. And this is kind of typical. Like when you get to certain age brackets, you have sort of different financial abilities. And in your 50s, probably mid 50s is sort of your peak, where you have more disposable income and you can sort of buy bigger books. Well, what happens is, when one generation kind of passes, they pass that torch to a new generation that can now afford the books that are coming into that market. So basically that's all that's going to happen. One generation will pass, and then the other generation will kind of absorb it. Fortunately, we're in a situation where my generation, which is Gen X, were comic collectors, and very, very into comics, much more so than maybe Gen Z or the millennials were. Like my generation was the plastic generation, where we were into the 90s books. And, there was a huge amount of collecting back then. It was another kind of bright spot within the hobby in terms of just the number of people in the hobby. You'll find that probably there'll be another generation, that in that COVID generation, where there'll be another bright spot where there's a lot of hype around comics. And those people, once they age up, they'll probably start buying bigger books as well. So what'll end up happening is, my generation, now that we have a little bit more disposable income, can maybe say, hey, I might want to buy that big book. I might want to buy that other big book. And you'll get a little bit more people in the hobby that will kind of keep the hobby going, especially at that high-end market. Another thing that you're seeing, and this is something that's kind of independent of all the different generations, is that there's been enough time where people have been collecting in comics that there's more of an institution to comic collecting, that what happens is, big companies or investment houses now see comics as a vehicle for financing or for financial gain. And once that happens, they become a commodity that just, I know it sounds horrible, but it's a thing where they will kind of have intrinsic value, just like original art does. If you think about original art, I think of the young generation. Do they really like original art? Are those Picassos going to be worthless? Probably not. Okay. It's probably going to be the case that these institutions or these more high-end collectors will, absorb that change in, who is owning the comics. So there, or art in this case. So I don't see it as a problem. So I don't think the boomers, as I said, dying off will impact negatively the market. It'll actually probably just maybe even fuel the market, because a whole bunch of inventory will come in, and all of a sudden you'll have more collectors being created and more people that will all of a sudden have access to things that they never had access to before. Generally, it's kind of like the gold rush. When they found gold in the Klondike, it didn't reduce the value of gold. It actually increased the value of gold because there was new excitement around gold. So it's kind of weird how that works. Sometimes supply and demand aren't quite as universally that the case that if there's more supply, then the demand will drop, or the value will drop. So it's a little bit different than that. Hopefully that makes sense. Patriot, last question. Patriot wrote, my interest is 60s to 80s horror books in the raw and high grade, and some graded. I believe that the best buys and future books will be in demand. Do you agree? I'm already seeing this. You're sort of preaching to the choir on that one, because what I've seen is Bronze Age. Those would be Bronze Age. So really, there wasn't much horror in the early 60s. It was really from 1968, 69 that both DC and Marvel were dabbling in horror again, like trying to get around the code. And you get, House of Secrets, House of Mystery, all those books kind of coming back. And Chamber of Chills, there's like a bunch that were kind of in that era. And those books weren't collected. That's the cool thing. They weren't really collected in the Bronze Age. Really, superheroes were being collected in the Bronze Age. So what happened was a lot of these horror books were read and enjoyed, just like the way Golden Age books were. They were read and enjoyed, tossed, and therefore that's why they're fairly valuable when you find them in high grade. It's again the scarcity part. So I think what's going to happen is as people kind of dabble in it and really start enjoying it, because there's a lot of really cool stuff that was created in the Bronze Age for horror. Bronze Age horror has a lot of potential to grow up in value. What I've seen is it's sort of a younger market than the way pre-code horror is. So what you have is every so often like a Bronze Age horror high grade copy will come to market, and you'll see a massive sale, and then people will go, "Oh wow, that's a really big sale." A bunch of more copies will come to market, and then the price drops. It's kind of like one of those fluctuations as the hobby sort of goes that way. It has to establish the what is the fair market value for the books, and that hasn't really been fully established in the Bronze Age. It's one of those things that it takes a few sales to kind of build up. And I do see that overall trend is quite strong for Bronze Age horror. I do believe that that's where the market is going. And back to the previous question about, if the publishers do this, will things get better? Well, another thing that we're seeing is a lot of the movie houses or the movie production companies are looking at horror again. I mean, horror was huge in the 80s, and had a revival in the 90s. It's one of those things that hasn't been done for a while in terms of creating some good movies, but also hasn't been done by the comic community, where the closest thing we had was that Werewolf by Night special. Well, I think there is that potential that if we start making a little bit more of those horror-related movies or specials, then people will be interested in it, and you'll see the demand being built for it. So those are the questions for this week. I hope you enjoyed my answers. If you have a question you want answered put it in the comments below, and I will answer it next week. Thanks again for watching. Bye for now.